Okay, Peter Ross on fly tying, back to part 2 of the introduction. Before I go any further, I just want to make a amendment, a small correction to an earlier statement. I said that when I showed this fly, this is the moth, when I showed this in part 1, I said it has a badger hackle on the front. It's actually a partridge hackle. The partridge hackle is rarely used on a dry fly, but it is on this particular fly. You'll see me tying this as we go through the series, but I just want to make that small correction so that no one gets misled. Now, I was showing you feathers, and I want to show you some other useful feathers. First of all, we've got swan or goose feathers. These are them. They're big, long feathers. I cut them down to store them better in my box. I don't know if they're swan or goose. I pick them up when I'm down on the riverbank or at the pool at St Bride's or even around Roath Park. If you see a nice big white feather, pick it up, and you can dye it again with the Dylon dye or Vineyards dye. And this is a green, a nice olive, which I use in some of the olive flies. So swan or goose feathers. We've also got some very attractive feathers called marabou, which we use in lots of flies, often used in still water flies, reservoir fishing, that sort of thing. But in some sea trout flies and that sort of thing. Marabou is very useful. Comes in lots and lots of colours. Then turkey. Around Christmas time, anyone killing turkeys, if you can get your hands on some of the feathers, they'll all need treating, these feathers, if you pick them up in the wild. But these are turkey feathers, very useful and natural feathers. Another one that you pick up or you can buy is the cock feather centre tail. Very useful feather, used quite a lot to make, it's a famous nymph called the pheasant tail nymph, but it's useful for tying several different flies. Cock feather centre tail. Another very attractive feather is the peacock eye feather. Now this is from the tail. You've seen the fan tail of a peacock when he's in his breeding livery. These eye feathers, we use the quills from the centre to do dry flies. I'll show you that as we go along. In fact, if I can pick out one of the flies here, I'll hold it by the tail. This particular fly, the body on this fly, you may not be able to see it, is peacock quill stripped. I'll be tying that for you. Anyhow, that's a very useful feather, very attractive feather. Now it's a long feather, and down the stalk are these hurls. We call them hurls, and we use these a lot as well. So from the eye feather, there's quite a bit to use. I showed you earlier the peacock sword feather, which is used in the Alexandra fly. This is the peacock sword feather on that wing there, and I showed you that in part 1. It's all from the tail of the peacock, but the sword feathers are along the bottom. Okay, now again some very pretty feathers from the golden pheasant, and this is the golden pheasant. This is what we call the tippet. Very attractive, orange black bars on it. They can be dyed different colours, but this is a very useful feather, and it's used quite a lot in salmon flies, and we use it a lot in trout flies and sea trout flies. This teal blue and silver has it in the wing, in the tail. You see the tail? And it's also on the tail of the black pennel. So there you can see a couple of examples how we use the tippet. The other feather from the golden pheasant, I mean that's from its neck, the back of its neck. This is from the head, it's called the crest. And this feather here is a beautiful feather in nature. Lovely feather. It's used to go over the back of some salmon flies like that, and it's also used in the tail of some flies. I can show you on some of the ones that we've tied here. If you look at the stoat's tail fly, it's called stoat's tail. Don't want to confuse you, but the tail on it is this lovely yellow feather. So there it's used for the tail. It is a lovely feather, and I do, you know, I think you'd probably move on to those feathers as we go through the series. Another feather, which is fairly new to me, it's called CDC. They're all little feathers in here, so I won't get them out. CDC is a French word called cul de canard, and it's from around the preen gland of a duck. Now the preen gland is towards the rear end of a duck, on its back, and the duck stimulates it with its beak and spreads the oil which comes from the preen gland, spreads the oil over its body, and it makes its body waterproof. We've all heard the saying, water off a duck's back. It's because of the oil from the preen gland. So you can imagine that will be very good to use in a dry fly, because it'll float so well. Now I've got some furs here to show you, and one that's very popular, I used a lot, is seal fur, natural seal's fur. This has been dyed yellow, but it's a natural product, and it's very useful because it has a sort of sparkle, and we use it on some of the big flies, salmon flies, etc. And this is a red version of natural seal's fur. Very, very useful. Now, it's been not too easy to get hold of some of this, but it seems to be back on the market now, so there are some substitutes. This is a seal fur substitute. It's very, very good. I don't know if there's any difference. I don't know if the fish know any difference, and this is a yellow substitute. I suppose there's nothing quite like the natural, because it's got a sparkle about it, and it is a lovely material. Now, staying with furs for a moment, we've got rabbit, a patch of rabbit which I use and I like very much. It forms a lovely, it's lovely to dub. When I say dub, to twist on the silk to form a body. It's very easy to use for a dubbing, and it's actually used on this fly, which is the grey duster. I'll show you that. Most of you will know about dubbing, but if you're newcomers, you'll see me demonstrating it. And hare's ear, hare's mask. This is half the mask. I've split it again for storage, and I've chopped the tip of the ears off to get it in my storage box. But this is a mask from a hare, and we use the fur from the base of the ears and around the face of the hare. Other furs, tails, we use tails, quite a few tails of different animals. And we start here mainly with the squirrel, natural squirrel. It's a lovely material, it's used. Squirrel, well, a lot of hares are a bit slippery, not too easy to use, but it forms a wing like that on some flies. And it's nice because it's mobile in the water. And the squirrel tails can be dyed. These have all been dyed different colours. I didn't dye these myself. I bought them like this. There's an orangey one there. There's a clarity coloured one there. And this is a blue one. And I've got several others. All squirrel tails. One I use a lot is from a mink. We want to kill as many mink as we can. If you get the mink, can get a mink or know someone, the tail will need treating. It's a smelly old animal. It's almost black. It's brown, very dark brown, but I use it on this fly here. The name of the fly is a dovey black and orange. The wing is a stoat tail. It's such a dark brown that you can call it black. Bucktail, we have bucktail, which is the tail of a deer, and this is one dyed black. And I've got a couple of others here to show you. We use them in salmon flies and sea trout flies. Bucktail can be a bit brittle. It can tend to flare out a bit when you use it, but I'll be using some of that as we go through the series. So that's the bucktail. One other tail I want to mention to you is from a calf, a normal cow calf, you know. That can be quite useful too. Okay, now I will say a lot of this natural material, hair and rabbit and that sort of thing, try to buy it from an established supplier, because if you buy it from an established supplier, it will have already been treated for life, for vermin, and it can go straight into storage. Now take care if you're given materials, furs or feathers, from a well-meaning shooting friend, you know, or a gamekeeper. Now they can come up with some fantastic materials, and I've had some very good stuff, but it will need treating. Now, if they do offer you stuff, never refuse it, because one day they will come up with a gem. So always thank them and take it from them. If you don't want the material, then dump it yourself. But it will need treating. Now, I've had all sorts of stuff offered me from some of my gamekeeper shooting friends. I've had dead moles wrapped in newspaper. I've had live bantams in a cardboard box. I've had a roadkill tawny owl. Incidentally, the feathers from that were very good. And I even had trimmings from a horse. But they will need vermin proofing. And the best way to do it is to put them in a zip, you know, those polythene zip containers, or a Tupperware box, or something like that, a sealed container, and put it in your home freezer. Your wife may not be very happy, or your girlfriend or your partner, but that's the best way to do it. And put it in the freezer for about 6 to 8 weeks. If you don't want to do that, sprinkle inside the sealed container some dog or cat flea powder, and put it in the garage or somewhere, again 6 to 8 weeks. If you use the powder, you will need to wash the feathers afterwards, because and wash them gently in warm soapy water using fairy liquid or something like that. Okay, we'll move on now to tinsels. And one of the best tinsels you can buy is this flat duo tinsel. It's gold one side and silver the other side. Can you see that? Gold one side, silver the other side. And you can apply it so that the colour you want showing is there. You see my little plastic holders. Some lovely new materials now called holographics. This is a goldy silvery one, beautiful material to use, and this is a red holographic. I love it, and it's fairly new to us. Well, in fly tying terms, it's new. This is a pearl sort of holographic, very useful, lovely stuff. Some of the old fly tyers, I'm sure, would have used this material had it been available to them at the time. Now, then we've got some braids. This is oval braid, which we will use probably for tags on flies and for ribbing big salmon flies. or sea trout flies, and this is it in a gold. It comes in various thicknesses, so you know you'll build up your material as you go along. Next, some wire, a gold wire, very fine gold wire, useful material, and this is a copper wire. You can see my little plastic tubes on there. They come in different sizes. You just cut off what you want, and it keeps everything in order. My friend Dave Lewis gave me that tip. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some yarn. I'll call it yarns. I use quite a bit natural knitting wool. 3-ply knitting wool. If you buy a ball of wool, you get thousands of flies out of it, and it's lovely material to use. I don't know why it's not used more often. The body on this stoat tail is wool, and it's been ribbed with some of the ribs we've just been talking about. But I like wool because it absorbs a bit of water, and it's not that I want a heavy fly, but it helps the fly to sink a bit. Then we got some floss. This is a red floss. You can see that. A white floss. They're useful. And a green. All useful materials. And also, I just want to show you chenille. This again is a very useful material in fly tying. So you'll get you'll build up as you go along. A quick word on hooks. Most hooks are good quality today. I like to use Camazan. I use them a lot, but I like Partridge, Timco, TMC, and Mustard. They're all good quality hooks. If you're using dry flies, they can be up eye or down eye for dry fly, but you will need a light wire hook because you want it to float. And the sizes, well, I'll come to that in a minute. Just talk about wet flies, trout, wet flies, usually all down eye. Now, sizes. For trout, you'll need 14, 16 and 12. I don't think you'll need any others for trout. You may want to go to a 10. And staying on trout, you may eventually move on to nymph type hooks and clink hammer and sedge type hooks. They're slightly shaped hooks that you will sort of move on to. Salmon and sea trout, we're talking bigger sizes like this. This is a size 6, by the way, but you will need a 10, an 8 and a 6. And for sea trout at night, a 4, which is the lower the number, the bigger the hook. The 4 is a useful sort of fly for size hook for sea trout. Some of the bigger salmon flies are black like this. I've got one here which I'll be using to do a demo in a moment, and they've nearly all got an upturned eye with a fold over eye. I don't know if you can see that. Of course, you sort that out when you wind it, as we have with this little sample in the vise. This, by the way, is an Apache shrimp, which I tied for one of my friends in Scotland. Right, back to... I'll just remove this fly because I want to give you a quick demonstration on starting and finishing a fly. So I'll put this bare hook in the vise. You'll notice I hide the point. Now, as I said on part 1 of this introduction, I learned the whip finish from a book. It wasn't easy, and I had to sort of get into it myself. Now, I'm using a big hook to demonstrate the start and the finish of a fly, and I'm also going to use heavy grade silk. This is not normally for tying flies, this big one here. It's for putting rings on a rod. Now, the easiest way, if you're a newcomer, start the fly, is you'll give 3 winds forward. 1, 2, 3, and keep in the same rotation, 3 winds back. 1, 2, 3. Now once you're like that, your silk is secure. And if to start off finishing the fly, to carry on tying the fly, most flies you would put a foundation of silk down towards the bend like this. In touch and turns, a way to do touch and turns, if you keep your silk at an angle like this, you'll find it'll slide down, and that'll give you the touch and turns. Okay, now I'm going to, that was if we were to start a fly. I'm not going to start a fly, I'm not going to tie a fly today, but I wanted, that's the start. I just want to demonstrate the start and the finish. Now I'll cut that off. Now let's assume we've tied a fly and we're coming back up to the head, okay? And we're going to finish it. This is the way I do it by hand. I'm going to do the whip finish, but I recommend you get a whip finish tool and follow the instructions that come with it. But the way I do it, I do that loop there, form it over. Now you can see the bobbin is being supported by the way I'm tight, and I just wind forward with this top loop here about 3 times, and that is a whip finish, just like that. You put your needle in. If you don't put your needle in, it'll twist up, and you just draw it and remove the needle as you go. Now that is a whip finish, and that would be, if we had tied a fly, that's how we would normally finish it off. So just looking at the book, you can see you cross over and then you wind towards the eye that way. Anyway, that's the way to do it. I'll do that again. You cross over, make a loop. You're supporting the silk, the bobbin, and you just wind towards the eye like this. And then you put your dubbing needle in the loop and draw it up. I found that difficult to do when I started, trying to follow step by step from the book. Hopefully showing you that way. If you want to do it by hand, that's probably the best way to do it. We got some guys in our club who are very skilled and can do it with one hand. I'm not up to that. Now the other way of finishing a fly, which is pretty good, is with a half hitch. And with a half hitch, you simply form a loop like that, put it over, secure it with your finger, and draw it up. This is a half hitch. Form a loop, turn it over, and draw it up. Form a loop, turn it over, and draw it up. I missed it then. Form a loop, turn it over, and draw it up. Okay, now that's a half hitch. Not a bad way to finish a fly. Now, sometimes with a half hitch, if you cut the silk tight to the knot, it can unravel. So what I tend to do is I tend to cut it a bit short, a bit long I mean, and wax it, and then I put the fly down, and I will then cut it tight when the varnish is dried. Another way of doing a half hitch, this is an old pen. The biro is out of it, it's gone, but I sometimes use this. Now, if you see this, to do a half hitch, do it like that, and it slides down. See that? This is another way of doing a half hitch. My recommendation is for a whip finish with a whip finish tool. That is my recommendation. Okay, so that's that. Now on small flies, you can use other little tools, other little bits and pieces. I occasionally use something like a cotton bud on a small fly, like that. You see that? This is just a cotton bud that I've cut the end off. As long as there's no sharp edge, and you can put half hitches on like that. Okay, that's it. I don't think there's much else to show you now, but I do look forward to you joining me in the series when we start to actually tie flies. Now, those half hitches, remember, cut the silk like that. If it's a half hitch, you don't need to worry. Varnish the head. We're assuming this is a fly that's been completed. Varnish the head. put the fly away, take it out of the vise, put it away until that varnish is dry, then you can cut it tight. If you do a whip finish with a whip finish tool or by hand, you won't need to worry about that. Okay, I'm glad you stayed with me for these two introductions, part 1 and part 2, and I hope you stay with me throughout the series when I'll be tying actual flies. Thank you for watching.